To the 8th episode of Let's Schmooze. I'm Doug Ebach, the original screenwriter for the movie Sweet Home Alabama, and each month I bring on guests to discuss topics related to writing for various entertainment media. Today my guests are screenwriters Karen Stillman and David Bunello. Karen has written pilots for or sold projects to Fox, ABC, CBS, Freeform, Lifetime, NatGeo, and USA. She is currently writing a feature on Golda Meir, as well as a thriller based on a true story. David's credits include Around the World in 80 Days, 12 Rounds Reloaded, and Hallowed Ground, which he also directed. He sold the high-concept summer tentpole project Atlantis to Broad Green Pictures, and his hit list script Decoy is currently in pre-production. So welcome, guys. And the topic today is notes, as in getting studio notes. So just first, I guess, and maybe should say that there's sort of two kinds of feedback. There's feedback you get from your writer friends, right, that to help you make your script better, and that you can ignore, with the only penalty being your script may not be as good. And then there's the notes you get from the people who are paying you or putting up money for the film, or directors or stars that can pull the plug. So I guess that's kind of more the focus. But I'm curious if you have any, when you go into a notes session, do you have any particular strategies or approaches to getting notes? And I guess let's start with Karen.
Well, it kind of depends, I think, on how the project came to be there, at least for me. I mean, if it's a project that you've championed, that, you know, it was your baby and you've sort of taken it up the ranks, I think you look at it one way. And if it's a project that you've been hired to write, I think it's a very different approach. And you know, for those projects, I try to say, you know, it's your clown show, I'm the balloon maker. It's, you know, you really are trying to do for them what they want. And, you know, they hired you for a reason. So I'm always curious as to what scripts they read of mine that made them hire me. What did they like? What do they see in it? But it's a very specific thing that you're doing. And also for what I'm writing for television, different networks have very different approaches to, you know, what they want. I mean, writing for Lifetime and writing for, you know, a different, like Netflix or something, you're going to be two very different projects. So, you know, that's one thing, to really understand how it got there. If you're, you know, if you've sold something up the chain and it's your baby, I think you have more of a chance to say, you know what, I'm going to push back on those notes a little bit more and let me explain my vision. But I think one thing that you know, overall, I really try to take into a room is that nobody's the enemy. Everybody wants this to be good. Like, I think that's where I start. It's just sort of how I, you know, might push for some things and not for others.
Okay. And David, do you have any particular strategies?
Well, when I started my career, I was much more defensive. I think as we all are when we're younger. We go in with like, no, that's wrong. And now I go in and I try to say, okay, let me hear their notes and not react and just go, huh, that's interesting. That's interesting, and write them all down, and then go home and either drink into oblivion or pound into the wall, and then the next morning wake up and go, you know what, I think I can take that note and do this with it and satisfy both masters. So I think that's either experience, maturity, age, or all of the above mixing together that has led me down that path. But I also do believe that, you know, look, on a movie set, and I say this all the time, you have somebody in charge of the lighting. You have somebody in charge of makeup. You have somebody in charge of wardrobe. My job as your writer, I am in charge of story. That is my job. I am the gatekeeper of story. So if you come up and say, the actor's not going to throw this line away and not going to do it, I'm going to say, then the story is not going to make sense because it's the only reference to what happens 5 scenes later or 40 minutes later. This line must be here for this reason. And a lot of directors who are not writers don't really think that way.
Yeah.
I think they just go, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And it's like, it does matter. And that's why it's there.
Yeah.
The last thing you want to do is get into the editing room and not have it and realize, shit, now we have to shoot over Doug's shoulder onto Karen and ADR Doug's line, even though it's really important, and really important lines are typically on screen. Right. And so anyway, I try to see myself as the story keeper. And if they go, look, I can go, look, it doesn't matter, change that line. As long as this is there, doesn't matter. Just make sure that gets conveyed. And they're like, okay. But now I tend to be a lot less, I guess I've matured. I don't know. I'm less defensive.
Yeah,
I guess
I remember when I was in film school, and all these people are giving you notes, and you walk out going, yeah, they don't know what the hell they're doing. They're all morons. Each one of them are morons. And then like a couple of days later, you're like, well, maybe this one note was kind of okay. Well, and to your point, I think it's sort of like, what are they trying? Even if you don't like the note, what's underneath the note? What are they having an issue with? What's the problem? Because maybe you can address the problem without addressing the actual, taking the note in that particular way.
Right.
But again, to your point, it's really like young writers and just people just starting out are really defensive. It's like, well, I put my heart and soul into, you asked for my heart and soul. There's my heart and soul on the page. Yeah, but what are they? There's something that's not working.
Right. They're calling your baby fat or ugly. One. And two, it is, like you just said, it is exactly the note beneath the note. Sometimes they can't even tell you what their problem is. They think it's sort of this, but it's not really that, but it's really this. But they don't have the experience or the expertise or the analytical skill to go, no, it's that. And you have to kind of dig through that and go, oh, no, the note behind the note is, you don't like the fact that she kissed that guy on page 4.
Right.
And,
which sort of is about what I think, back to your question, I think it's also that's your job. Like your job is not just to write, your job is to know, is to get the information out of them if they can't express it to you. And it really is a matter of asking the right questions and continually asking the questions and, okay, so why didn't you, like this? Why didn't you, what was the issue there? And, the more questions you ask, so the more you get a sense of what their problem is. Sometimes if you ask a lot of questions, they realize they're giving you completely contradictory information because I've had that as well, where I've gotten, sometimes you get 2 different notes from, a producer and, a network executive gives you completely different, which one do you take and how do you maneuver that? But sometimes the executive will give you 2 completely contradictory notes, and you have to very gently, without offending anybody, really important, don't be offensive. Just try to get at what the problem is and, how you can fix it. That's the key.
Right. I think like, of course, executives are different, right? Like not every executive follows every rule, but I had an experience early in my career, which was really enlightening to me about kind of the expectation on the executive side. Because I think one of the resistance you're talking about when you're young is, they tell you to do this and you're thinking like, but that's not right. And so I went into this meeting with this executive and he was just finishing up kind of like reading a script as I sat down, and he put it down. He's like, that this is, I just got this rewrite and, like I'm not happy. And I was kind of like, oh, why? And he said, the writer just did everything I told him to. And I was like, isn't that the good thing? And he said, no, I mean, he should be better. I can do the stuff that I told him. I want him to do a better job than I said. And I was like, oh, and then, so, like we think like they're holding on to their notes so tightly, and actually maybe they're kind of they know that it isn't maybe the right thing, but they're hoping you'll do more. So yeah, I think that is a good thing. So,
so many notes come with a qualifier. This isn't the way to do it, or this isn't the right thing, and what they're saying is I don't have the expertise to, that's not my forte, but, I sort of kind of want, her to say I love you, but not say I love you, like that kind of thing. So, yeah.
A good executive will know they don't have those skills, and a new executive will want to prove that they have those skills when they don't.
That's really
and I try to instill this in people. My experience has been a lot of times you deal with executives and producers who are not creative. And to us as creatives, we cannot imagine that because our brains are programmed completely differently. Our brains are programmed to come up with 50 ideas a day. They don't think that way. They are very, logical and linear and what's in front of me and what papers are on my desk. And it's alien to us in a literal sense. So when they have one good idea, they're like cling to it like a life preserver at the Titanic. Like you've got to put that idea in. It's like, because that's the idea you had this week. I have 5 of those every hour and I can discard them because guess what's coming next? Another one, so get out of the way. But I feel like, and I mean that, it's hard to understand that they don't share the same thought patterns we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once you get that, you kind of go, oh, that's why they're clinging to this. And that's why I think it was Stephen D'Souza at the Writers Guild who once said, the best thing you can ever say to somebody is yes, and. Like if they say to you, hey, I know it's a movie about a guy who falls in love with a woman, but what happens if she turns into a dog and he's allergic to dogs? And it's a totally different movie that you've just sold them. And you go, yes, and what if he turns into a cat? And now they can't be together. And then you have this idea where they just want to play in that sandbox with you for a little while and feel like they contributed. And then at the end of the day, they're going to go, that's a stupid idea. That's not the movie we want to make. We want to make Sweet Home Alabama too. But they had that notion and they want you to kind of follow the breadcrumbs at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I feel like sometimes, so I guess the next question is, you kind of getting at something like when you get a note that is like a bad note, right? Or like you think is wrong for the script. So it's not just you didn't hear it right or you needed to open your mind a little bit, but like, you're like, no, I shouldn't do this, but it's coming from someone who you kind of have to please. Do you have any strategies? And so the yes and strategy, that's sort of similar. A lot of times I'll say, that's really good. It gives me another idea. And then kind of like give them credit for the totally different idea that I'm going to use instead of theirs. Do you guys have any strategies like that for dealing with a note that is just bad?
Go, David. What do you? sounds like you have some.
Absolutely, yeah. Give them credit for springboarding into your brilliance. Absolutely, 100%. Because then they feel like they're part of the process.
Yeah.
That's a great way to win them over and make them feel like they earned their gold star and their door today. And by the way, it's funny because when I've dealt with TV producers who are showrunner writers, they are the creatives you should listen to. And when they say, take this note, and Karen, you do a lot more TV than I, take this note, you go like, holy shit, that note will work because you're in the trench 24/7 every day.
Yeah.
You breathe and live this show. Yeah. So you know these solutions. Like I worked with Michael Pillar in the Dead Zone, and Michael was a genius. And literally he would say, let's do this, boom, boom, boom. And you're like, oh my God, you just saw all the way through the forest.
Yeah, yeah.
In 3 steps.
One of my favorite books series, The Dead Zone, obsessed with Dead Zone. But
right.
Beyond that, no, I agree. I mean, I exactly what you're saying. The best thing in the world is if you get a note and somebody helps you make your stuff better, right? Like you're like, oh my God, I didn't see that. That was amazing. And I always try to give credit and lots of it because the next note may suck. So you want to really drill down like that was an excellent note. And then maybe your response to the next one, your reaction's not quite as excited or, I do a lot of pausing like, okay, let me think. I'm just thinking because I'm trying to figure out how to do what you're saying, just sort of segue it into something, that might work or that might, they will be happy with the way that it goes. But I think you and I are both sort of coming to the same conclusion, which is like, don't offend people. It's a really dangerous place to go, and you can mostly get through without doing it. So don't do it if you don't have to.
And really, I think the big way to do that is don't react in the moment.
Right.
No matter how angry you're getting.
Yeah.
Like you'll have a bad executive who's new at this who says, I just found the scene really stupid. And it was like the heartbeat of your movie.
Right.
That one scene that made you want to tell the whole story. And by the way, I think that in some weird way they had this radar where they can pinpoint that one scene and they want to rip it out in the first draft. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this. Always to me. It's always like, what? That's like the whole reason I wanted to tell this whole movie. And then like you're crushed. And the whole rest of the meeting is like you like picking up the pieces of what remains of you. And then, so I think if you don't react in the moment and you say, I'm going to go home and think about it, I'm just going to take it all in.
Right.
And then I'm going to sit with it overnight. And I really do think it's overnight. And the next one you get up and say, okay, what really did they say?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that's the thing. And if we, not to say, because to, what you're saying before, Doug, it's like, you don't want to change it all. You're not going to change it all completely. You're not going to change it because they told you so and you feel like you have to. The point is you want to end up in a conversation about it. Like that's what you want to get to, not feeling like you're being, hit, that they're being hit. It's really just like, how can we have a conversation and both get to that? Now that said, there are times when you really do come to a head. I mean, where you just your vision and what they're telling you to do are so completely at odds. So, David, I'm going to ask you how you handle those situations.
It's funny. I had sold this giant pitch a couple of years ago to Broad Green before they went bankrupt, and it was like a big summer tentpole movie. It was a big payday for me, and it was an original concept, and we were dealing with the producers, and And in the midst of me writing the first draft, all the executives got fired and replaced over broad green. So when I handed in the draft, they were like, "We have no idea what this movie is. We don't know what it is. All we know is the guys who run the company loved it and bought it, and now we're stuck with it." Yeah. And I'm like, "Great, here we go." Right. So at one point I was on the phone with, I guess it was the DOD or the CE at that time who I was dealing with, and he was not getting something. And I said, "No, you don't understand it. This is what the movie is." And I told him a sentence, and he goes, "Oh my God, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. I didn't know that." Yeah. And a week later he said to me, "Yeah, we don't like that anymore." I said to him, "I got to tell you, that cool thing was the reason your boss bought it in the room. So you're going to have to explain to him that you don't want that anymore, what he wants. Right. Not my problem." And then when I was dealing with the producer at one point, we were, because of their notes, we were unwinding everything and trying to put it back together, and it never fits the same way. We all know this. And I was working on how to solve the problem, and the producer said, "No, here's why. The character doesn't need to do this. They need to do this." And I said, "No, they can't do this because," and I can't tell you the plot, but I said, "because they would have done this 1,000 years ago if that happened." And he literally, his reaction to me on the phone was, "Fuck." And he realized I was right. Like, I thought through the whole thing, and he's like, "Oh shit, it's right from my face. I didn't see it." And I hope he can swear on this, but he said, that was what he said. That was his reaction. He was, "Oh fuck." And I said, "Right. This is why we're where we are in the story.
Yeah.
This is why I had to jump through 4 hoops instead of 1 hoop because of that." And he goes, "Okay, I get it." So sometimes they need to see it. When I get a bad note, I mean, look, when they're paying your check, and it's their movie, and you've just got to put their bad note in for them to see. Yeah. And there are times when it's your movie, and you can say, "I'm not going to do it. Yeah. I'm not going to make that change." And then they fire you and hire Doug Ebach to fix it. So, we've all been there too.
I mean, it's really tricky when that happens because you don't want to be fired and you don't want people rewriting you, and you want to be able to prove your point. And it's a really, I mean, that's a really, really tricky one. And I've had that situation. I actually had a situation where I was up for a project and I came in with this concept and I pitched the concept and they love the concept. We love it. We're hiring you. They hired me to write the project. And I came back in after my deal closed. I sit down with them. I'm really excited to have this meeting. And they're like, "So we love the concept and here's how we changed it." And and I literally, I don't know if you've ever had this experience. Like, I knew the minute they said it, it was such a profound change, it would never work.
Right.
And they had, without me, because my contract that we were, had sort of sold it to their boss, and everyone was on board. And as the writer, I could tell you, I knew from the minute it started. So I just didn't know what to do. I mean, didn't want to pull out of the project. It was a lot of money. I wanted to make the money. I didn't want to pull out of the project. So the question was, could I convince them otherwise? Or could I somehow work within their new framework and make it work? Tried one, didn't work. Pissed them off. So I tried 2, and that didn't work either. But yeah, that's a really tricky, and that happens more than I think people realize. What you pitch them, and they love you in the room, and they love what you're pitching, and then, like what you're saying, either the administration changes, or sometimes just they kind of something comes down, and the movie should be more like this, or the show should be more like this, and suddenly you're doing something totally that you didn't expect to be doing.
And I kind of think sometimes our job is to save them from themselves a little bit occasionally, right? To protect them from the bad ideas. And not that they are all bad ideas, of course, but there's that element of well, they're paying you, so you need to do what they say. But sometimes it's if I let them go down this route, it's not going to be good for them either. This isn't going to work. Yeah. That, of course, is hard because sometimes you can't confront them with that, as we're talking about the politics of it.
Sometimes you have to show them and write the really bad version, and that's also really painful. Because then everyone sees the really bad version you wrote, and you're like, "I know, I didn't want to write this bad version."
Ultimately, you get the blame for the bad script at the end.
You get the blame for, that's another thing. You're going to get the blame for everything, right? I mean.
Yeah.
And and no credit if it's good. They're going to give it to the director.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Kind of true.
Well, and one thing we've been alluding to just for the last few minutes that I think is important to recognize is that it's not like there's a monolith that's giving you notes. right? And then, like it's a range of people, and they could be at all different levels. They could be at the same level, but coming, like there could be the producer, and then if it's TV, there could be like the production company and the network, and they may not see the same movie, so that puts you in a bind. Kind of going back to the showing respect for the notes, like that's also something is you don't want to embarrass someone in front of their boss too.
Right.
So like, like that's sometimes if it's a junior executive in his boss's room, they say something stupid, like you don't want to call that guy out in front of his boss. That will not win you friends. So sometimes you have to kind of like, they may even realize as they're saying it, this is dumb, but now they've said it. So you got to say like, interesting, and then just sort of let it go, and
Right.
it works out. But I guess that's what maybe like, do you guys have any thoughts on like negotiating between the different power brokers sometimes?
I will say that one of the things I learned was I think this as well. I think when you deal with stuff like this, it's sort of like being in a relationship and the other side just wants to be heard. They just want to know that you heard them. So if you listen and you hear them, they sometimes don't care about the note as long as they care that they've been heard. Right. And the other thing that I've learned is if you say, I tried that and I couldn't make it work, then they go, oh, okay, you gave it a shot. You at least entertain my crazy notion about turning that woman into a cat for a page. You know what I mean? And then they go, okay, and then they sort of let it go sometimes. Sometimes not. Sometimes they are adamant and they hold on to it, and those people shockingly rise through the ranks in Hollywood. And even though they bankrupt studios or stuff, they tend to keep going up. I don't understand. So, so I will. I think sometimes when you have that young exec too, I had a situation. We had sold a project to Dimension with Wes Craven attached. And we pitched it over there, and they loved it. And then we pitched it to this young exec who was brand new, and she basically repitched our pitch to the bosses, but changed the pitch. So when we went to practice the pitch again in the room, she's like, "Well, you can't say that. That's not how I pitched it to them." I'm like, "But that's the movie that we're pitching, and that's what." And the director built like all these models. And like the whole movie was like built out, like they saw the toys. That's why we sold it twice. We sold it twice in the room. It was because the toys were all there. Anyway, so she said, but that's not the movie I pitched to my bosses. So you have to listen to me and do what I told you. And when the meeting ended, Wes Craven said to her, "You stay behind. I want to talk to you." And we were walking out of the room, and he said to her, "You don't talk to writers like that." Like I've met with Wes numerous times. He was an amazing man, but that was a moment where I said, this guy knows, he's a famous director, famous writer, he's created franchises, and he's like, you don't talk to writers like that. The minute you say that to them, you're stomping on what they're bringing to the table. You're stopping their creativity. You don't tell them how to be creative. You let them be creative. And by the way, she got fired.
What did you do in the room? I mean, what did you do when you pitched it? Did you do what she wanted you to do?
No. We basically, after that meeting, we got into it with you, said, but that's not how the movie works. So it's not the story. That doesn't make sense here. This doesn't track there. This is why it doesn't. She's like, but that's not how I pitched it to my boss, which is also the thing I think people need to realize is there's a stepping stone process. Right. So it's like playing telephone. Yeah. So if I pitch my movie to Doug and Doug pitches it to Karen, Doug may pitch it to Karen differently than I pitched it to Doug. So really, I want to get in the room with Karen.
Right. Well, that's a great thing to say because it's really true. It's like, and it's another reason that when I take notes, I try really desperately to do it in person. I try really hard not to take notes over the phone. One is because people feel like, you've driven there, you've parked in the parking lot, you've gone through all the security, you're like up there, like they actually have to think about what they're going to say to you. There's something about everyone getting up and going into a room and sitting there as opposed to just getting on your phone and doing it between 18 other phone calls, that they actually think about what they're telling you. And another thing is that you see the body language and you see who's paying deference to who and how it's really working. And if an executive has an idea and then another executive or the producer doesn't like it, you can sort of pick up on that and maybe gently know how to move it in a direction. I'm always trying to do things in person as much as I can, and it's harder for us, right? Like it's nice to be home and on the phone, but it's much, or now I guess with Zoom, but it's much better. For everyone to be there. I think there's also a sense of accomplishment. Like, okay, we've done this meeting. We all know where we're going. And I don't know, I'm assuming you do this too, but when I get to the end, sometimes I'll just like quickly go over, okay, like, so I feel like my major marching, orders are, to make this character more accessible and to make him more mysterious. Like I sort of just play it back to them. So the last thing they hear in the meeting is, where I know I'm taking it.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And an email the next day
Yes.
typically helps that.
Yeah.
If you can do it then, after digesting everything.
Yeah.
And after you want to go home and punch your cat.
There's always that too.
Yeah, I like the email. Like, let me summarize what we talked about yesterday, and sometimes you can kind of get rid of a note that way too. There's a percentage of notes that you can just either with that or with the I tried it didn't work. There's always like that. There's a percentage, and it's not a big percentage, but you can sometimes get rid of the worst by just saying, sort of like focusing on these other things.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, just maybe I missed that note, or
right.
we all forgot that note somehow.
And then sometimes they'll come back and say, don't also forget about this one, and then you're like, okay, now I guess they're committed, and I have to. And sometimes they don't say anything, and you're like, great, got away with that one. So
sometimes they don't remember what they tell you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know have you ever had this experience? And I only had this experience once, but I suspect I've actually had it more and not known it. I had an executive walk into the room and say, and this was for a movie that we were making, and this TV movie we were making. She said, I just really didn't read the draft. Really well. And I'm like we're all sitting in the meeting, I'm sitting with the producer, and and I just said, do you want to? I'm happy to come back another day if it's shit happens in people's lives. If this just is not a good time, I don't take it personally. I'm happy to come back another day. And she said no and wanted to do the notes, which was crazy because she really hadn't really read. So
right.
Yeah.
I've gone to a meeting for a particular script, and I've walked in, and the producer said to me, as soon as I sat down, your script got amazing coverage. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, wow, you called me all the way in for a meeting because you read the coverage?
Yeah.
Like you didn't, like.
Well, that happens all the time. It's just usually they don't admit it, right?
Exactly. I guess that's what it is. I did get a note on a script, a thriller, an independent thriller that I drafted a while ago, and the executive producer's note was, make sure you limit the amount of flashbacks. And I turned to the producer and I said, I don't understand this note. There are no flashbacks in this movie.
Right.
And he said, don't worry about it. And I said, no, I need to understand this note. You don't understand. I need to know what he's talking about. And the producer said, oh, he didn't read it. He just doesn't like flashbacks. So sometimes that's the note.
Yeah. Yeah.
My weird one like that one time was I had someone tell me it was an action script, and they said, so I have to tell you up front, I didn't read any of the action scenes. I figure they're always the same anyway. And the very first note she gave me was, it felt really disjointed. You skipped half the scenes. I don't know, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that note. So
that's really funny and kind of terrifying.
Yeah, not recognizing the irony of that situation. So
yeah. Has anyone else had the experience where other executives have quoted you exactly from certain books, like particularly Save the Cat? Like they said, well, Save the Cat, you need to do this. And they're like, say, now you want to go off and have the fun and engage sequence, so we should put that in here. And I'm thinking, holy mac, like, are you really quoting verbatim a book? Like, I understand the big concept of Save the Cat. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there when you're not sure what to do with your story.
Right.
Like, what am I missing, sort of.
Right.
But I think that I think a lot of executives follow screenplay and Save the Cat verbatim. And I think that's dangerous. And that's why I think maybe a lot of movies feel the same now.
Well, there's also what's like, the latest, greatest thing, right? Which is, I just saw, it's funny, it was like the Queen's Gambit. People love the Queen's Gambit. Well, that's the latest and the greatest. But, God forbid you try to pitch a period piece, before the Queen's Gambit, because, even now it's hard. But, that was a book from 1983. I mean,
it took 30 years, right, to get to the scene. Like the producer just kept pushing it uphill.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so it's sort of like, well, what's hot right now? I'd experienced during the pandemic where, there was a network that was interested in the project, and then everything sort of stopped at the beginning of the pandemic. Things were really weird. And by the time we were able to get in, the executive was like, look, they've changed their mind. They want something totally different now. These things are just going to happen. I mean, you just have to live with it.
I think whenever you're chasing a market, you're chasing the wrong thing. I mean, you chase a market. By the time if you ever even get that movie made, by the time it gets to screens, it's going to feel so dated.
Yeah.
And you're just not following the breath, the actual pulse of that story anyway. You're cramming another pulse on top of it, and it never works.
Yeah,
Even some executives realize this now, but some executives realize they are good about it, and some executives, I think I always tell when I teach, I tell my students, this town is really a cover your ass town. So basically, if I don't want to lose my job, so I'm going to hire the people who wrote the hit movies that just made money over the last month. So if Doug's movie opened this weekend at #1, I'm going to hire Doug. And after Doug's draft, Karen's movie opened up at #1, I'm going to hire Karen. And then at the end of the day, I can say, well, I hired Doug and Karen. You can't fire me.
Exactly.
And I think that's sort of where we get disjointed movies now. It's
Yeah. So. I mean, I think that unfortunately that's a lot of what it is, and it is a really big cover your ass town. And just sort of getting back to the notes thing, which is why you don't want to have a reputation. You have to play it really carefully. You don't want to have a reputation, as Doug was saying, as someone who just takes every note and does everything, and by the end the movie has no soul, but it was what they said. You don't want to go the other way, where it's you come in really like I'm not going to take those notes, even though that's what that's what you desperately need to get your boss to be happy with you. And I think that sort of to the point about notes, it's like I think it takes a long time to really understand good notes from bad notes, right? Like, I mean, like, it sometimes when you see it, sometimes right off the bat. It's like what you're saying, David, like the heart of your script, you knew. But sometimes you get a note and you're like, I think that I could do that. Maybe I could sort of do that. And you're kind of thinking it through in the moment. You don't know if it's good or bad till later. And, how do you address it at that time?
Well, yeah, I feel like a lot of times it's like my initial reaction is like, that'll never work. That'll break the whole script. And then like the next day I'll be like, wait a minute, here's how I can make it work without breaking the script. Like sometimes you just need time to think about it. And so you bring up a good point, Karen, which is, to be fair, like it's not like executives are all evil and writers are all geniuses. Like sometimes like the writer's the problem in the room, right? Like there are writers that just like are very resistant to any kind of feedback, and their script needs work, right? I mean, we all need feedback and stuff. So yeah, you can kind of go too far either way, either just not having any kind of opinion or having, like I must be my way or the highway kind of approach.
But it's that balance that I think you develop over the course of your career. You don't have a right away of supporting the things that work and not being difficult. Because as soon as you're labeled difficult, that's like a death knell. It's a death knell for your career.
Yeah.
So, or at least temporarily, for a couple of years, it could be. You know what I mean? Until you find new executives or you write something new that they all love.
Right.
And then they go, oh my God, you're such a genius again. And it's like, so it's a tough kind of tightrope to walk. And I think we all find it by stepping on a couple of landmines along the way, making the wrong choice and giving into every note and making the opposite choice and giving into no notes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I just think it's something you kind of maneuver as you gain more experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one very early on, one of my very first projects, really interesting because, to that end, there was the producer and the network executive were fighting about this note, like very intensely. And it was a pretty significant thing. And I was young. I agreed with the producer, but, I didn't want to piss anyone off. And I said to the producer, what should I do? And she said, just do what I'm telling you to do. Do what I'm telling you. I'm telling you I'm right. Do what she will see that. How fast did I get fired off that project? Like, like that was it. I mean, that was just, it just didn't work. And I think that.
Did the producer ever hire you again?
Yes, she did.
Okay. All right, good. All right, good. Because sometimes you don't get that reward.
Yeah.
Sometimes they need to place the blame.
And she spoke very highly of me too, and she tried to smooth things out for me. So.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes.
The other thing, the cover your ass type stuff, like that's definitely a thing. The other thing I think is, I've heard this said, like if you want to understand how decisions or why decisions are made in Hollywood, just imagine that everybody's terrified all the time, and that suddenly everything makes sense, right? Because it's true, like everybody's afraid of losing their jobs, and I think that infects the note process sometimes also. In the sense of like they start to second guess, right? They may love the script or the pitch or whatever, and then they're like, but that character's kind of unlikable. We need to make him more likable, or like there's some of these things like the likability of the character, or is the audience really going to understand this, or do we need to make it more clear? So there's sort of like they start to doubt whether the thing they liked is actually good. So I don't know if I guess build up their confidence. Do you have any thoughts on how you handle those?
Well, I always find that likability, this is why movie stars are movie stars, because they can be unlikable and we still like them. So I say this all the time about like Adam Sandler movies. Like Adam Sandler's not a very good actor. He's not particularly handsome, but he's one of the biggest movie stars in the world, and probably one of the best paid.
Yeah.
And if you talk to people like why they like him, guys like him because he's disarming, because he's not the hot guy that's going to steal your girlfriend, and girls like him because he makes them laugh.
Yeah.
I always say that. Like, you ever have that girlfriend, you say, why the hell are you dating that guy? And she goes, he makes me laugh. That goes a huge amount of way on some people. And so I think George Clooney can be an unlikable jerk in a movie as long as by the end of the movie, George Clooney has learned his lesson. And you can't get to that lesson if Scrooge is not a miser in scene 1 through 5. I mean, like, he has to be Scrooge.
Right.
And I feel like they've lost that nerve, like you're saying, but that's why you get Adam Sandler or George Clooney or Tom Hanks or to play kind of the curmudgeon. He's not always going to be Captain America. He might be the Scrooge. And that's okay as long as we understand why Scrooge is Scrooge.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, if you could have that scene, the flashback, because I can't hate it, but something that lets you understand why the person is the way they are. I got a really great note once. I was doing a project for the director of development for Robert Zemeckis' company, and she said that his theory, and I thought that this was kind of brilliant, is like you like someone who's good at their job.
Yep.
And it made me think of like The Godfather, right? Like, why do we love this horrible person? You like someone who's really good at what they do, even if I always like people who are funny, even if they're evil. Like, that's kind of what I like to put in. But I thought about that and I was like, that's an excellent way to think about it. You can write almost anyone if they're really, really good at what they do. There's something about that dedication, to their passion, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And
go ahead, David.
Sorry, and if they're not good at their job, like Indiana Jones, James Bond, Batman, they're all great at their job. If they're not good at their job, it's a comedy.
Yeah.
I always teach that as well. Like I say, if they're terrible at their job and they're fumbling through it, we're laughing with them and at them, and it's a comedy now. Because you can't do a straight movie where Indiana Jones is like dropping the vase that's 1 billion years old and unleashing evil spirit. Like, that's just not an Indiana Jones movie. So.
Or they get better at it, I think. There's an old Clint Eastwood movie called The Gauntlet. And one thing I love about this movie is they hire him to do this thing because he's really, have you seen it? Because he's really bad at his job. And that's why they hire him. And he gets better at it through,
They want him to fail.
They want him to fail. The whole point is they want him to fail.
Yeah.
And it's kind of great. Like, there's a great scene where he realizes that, and he's like, wait, am I really bad at my job? It's kind of a wonderful scene where, it's like, oh, I guess I really do suck at what I got to get better.
I think that's why Walter White is the best meth cook there is, right? Like, if he wasn't, I don't know. But the other part of that is, because in The Godfather is a great example. Another, in terms of likability, I always kind of go to, we root for goals, not people so much, right? So in The Godfather, like, someone's trying to kill his father. That's why he's, someone trying to shoot his father. That's why he's doing everything. And we kind of get that, even if we don't necessarily root for it. And the same thing with Breaking Bad, like, his initial response is like, he gets a terminal cancer diagnosis and he's worried about his family's financial health. So if they're kind of like motivated by something that we can root for, it doesn't really matter if we like them as much. That's more of a writery thing. But yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, and I think, David, your point about movie stars with Sweet Home Alabama, I definitely think that character, Reese can get away with stuff. That character does some horrible stuff, but Reese can get away with it because he doesn't like Reese. So, that helps.
It's an interesting. I don't think about it that way, but it is really interesting. Like, who's going to put an actor in mind?
I mean, if you look at Breaking Bad, it's one of the greatest anti-heroes ever created. And if you look at The Sopranos, it's another anti-hero, and we love them, even though they're not really nice people. I mean, he's a good guy in Breaking Bad, but in The Sopranos, he's not a nice guy at all. But we still follow him on the journey.
Yeah, interesting.
So.
Yeah, the likability, I think, overrated a bit. And you know, and I also think
I did not yet watch Uncut Gems, but I hear he's quite unlikable in it. But apparently the movie's amazing. So
yeah, yeah, and you know, like I think you were mentioning television versus film. You know, like I think Breaking Bad, he's likable early, and then he becomes unlikable later. But now you're in, right? Like so, it got you. So you want to see how it all comes out, even you know. And there is a point in the show I won't say, so spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it. But you know, there is a point in the show where I was like, wow, I don't know if I want to keep watching the show now because what he just did was like that may be a bridge too far. But you know, I just like stick with it. But it was like end of episode of season 2, so like yeah, I'm committed at that point. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I always find it funny that if you actually watch, back to Adam Sandler briefly, that movie, Mr. Deeds, there's actually a moment where he goes to save a cat from a burning building. And every time, I was at the Writers Guild when we saw it, and everyone started laughing. And I almost wondered if an executive said to them, you need a save the cat moment. So Adam Sandler was like, screw these people. I'm just going to write a moment where I save a cat. I swear to God, I almost wonder if he was like, I don't want these notes, so I'm just going to do what the hell you told me, and it's going to be stupid. And he did it. I don't know, but it's a literal save the cat moment.
That's like the likability, like you know the right. Can you make the character likable? John, really likable.
Right.
But yeah, I know.
That is, we're bouncing around a little bit off the topic, but that is an interesting thing that I think the problem you have with scripts is you don't have the likable movie star. Like, and sometimes you sort of need to do that in a script, right? Is just say he's very likable. I mean, that would maybe not quite literally like that, but you know, like you sometimes have to compensate for the fact that you don't have the actor there to be charming and good looking and all of that in a script.
I think there are ways to do it. I mean, you can make some, you know, I like people who are even if they're evil, if they're a little bit self-deprecating or they have a moment of self-consciousness, you know, if they just do something that's super relatable. You know, they can be the most horrible, like a serial killer, but they, you know, they get toilet paper on their shoe and they're trying to figure out, you know, what to do with it. Like they just have a moment where you go, oh yeah, like, oh, he's gonna go kill people. But yeah, I've had that toilet paper thing happen. It's really embarrassing. Like, you know, there are ways in, I think, and if you get that note, you know, and I've gotten notes like that now and then where it's just you're not quite sure what the executive has in mind, except they just have to make sure, as you were saying, that the character's likable because that's how they're going to have to sell it. And so I think you can put in moments to sort of, you know, make sure that they have something that's relatable.
Yeah, yeah, you know, it isn't. Go ahead, David. Sorry.
It's interesting that you said that because the executives want them to be likable, but the actor actually wants his or her character, to be very flawed and dark and like complex.
Right.
So they lean into like the whole, can you make him autistic? The executives are like, oh, does he have to be autistic?
Right.
Like the accountant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you made sorry about that, Max. If you had like not Gavin O'Connor, I think it was, making The Accountant, with Ben Affleck as his friend saying, I'm making this movie, would you have gotten that litany of notes saying, does he have to be autistic? Or OCD, or, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, and
I wonder about that.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it also kind of brings up the point that the notes, people have different kind of jobs on the film, and like David, you mentioned earlier, like your job as the story, you know, the person protecting the story, and actors have things that they want to, you know, that they're trying to protect as well, and you know, and you ignore the movie star at your peril as a writer if they have some thoughts on their character, you know. And you mentioned directors, and I had an experience working with a director, and the financing fell apart, and I won't name him because the movie didn't get made, but he was good actually ultimately, but he was kind of saying like, well, what if in this scene this stuff happens, you know, there's all physically is happening, and I was kind of like, you know, like that breaks the logic of the story. That is, it was a sci-fi thing, and it's like that's not the sci-fi gimmick that we had, and so I kind of very gently started doing that, and you know, he was like, listen to me, then he just sort of smiles and goes, yeah, I was just being a director, I wanted cool visual stuff. But you're right, that doesn't work. You know?
That's a really good point, because I think you have to recognize that the directors are not always thinking about story. You know, sometimes they are, but a lot of times it's like, well, what's the set piece? You know, what's the, you know, they're coming at it from a really different point of view, and I think it's helpful if when you're writing you keep that in mind, because everyone wants to attach a good director, so you want to have things in the script that are going to entice a director to be interested in it, and without them putting them in later, and and you're going like, wait, that's having your experience done, just that's not going to fit into the story. I mean, it's actually a really interesting difference between writing on paper and understanding how to get things made. It's you want to entice an actor, you want to entice a director, you want things in there that people are like, oh, I really want to be part of this.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And like credit to that director to recognize, oh yeah, that was a bad idea, and kind of like fess up to it. I was trying to be very gentle, right? I didn't want to piss him off, and he wasn't pissed off at all. He's just like, oh, you're right. I didn't think of that. But like he has an agenda. He's going to be the look of the film he's going to be judged on that. So he's trying to make sure that he gets what he wants. And yeah, so you have to kind of hear, I guess, where people's notes are coming from. And I guess I'm thinking about that because the studio execs who want to make sure the audience understands and the character is likable, there's an agenda behind those notes that's legit, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you can't do the exact note, but you got to kind of figure out how you can help them with their concerns, about how they're marketing the movie or something.
Karen, I have a question for you.
Sure.
After you write a draft and before you wanted to like go to your agents, your reps, or your producers, who are your first round of notes with?
You're looking at them. Doug is, don't you have like, I have like my three go-to people, right?
Yeah.
And Doug is always great. And Doug is particularly great at story. I feel like Doug, really helps me solve story issues. I have a friend who's amazing at character. She's not fabulous at story, but really amazing at character. And then I have another friend who's really good at both. So that's, but nobody, I don't get it anywhere without someone. Because you also you've missed stuff, right? Like you know that you can't see everything, and so you got to trust them. What do you do? Who's your
Same thing. I have a small group, and it does seem to have gotten smaller. It's always an uneven number for tie break reasons.
Yeah.
It's usually 5, and now it's probably 3.
Right.
And then and I agree. There's those moments in the script where you go, well, forget it, I'll fix it later, and you kind of gloss over that piece. And that's the one thing they always go, it's not making sense. And you're like, shit. I did not get away with it.
No, it's really they catch your shit, which is good. When I very first started, I used to go down to the Writers Guild with my laptop, and I met some other writers there, and we sort of we formed this little impromptu writers group. This was many years ago, and I noticed that some of us really were great at, or tried to listen to everyone's notes, and some didn't, and we're very much like, well, you're just a starting writer, you don't really know what you're talking about. I know what I'm doing, and mostly those people aren't working anymore because they were so adamant that they knew everything. And it's not that they were bad writers; it's just they were so difficult. I think it was hard. You have to believe in yourself, but you have to work with others as well. It is a collaborative business. Right. You're not writing a novel, and it's something to think about as well.
Right. I mean, you have to learn how to give constructive criticism.
Yes. Oh God.
You can't just be. Yeah. You can't just be that. What do they say in the writers' room? You break it, you bought it. So if you're in the staff writers' room on a show and you say that's not going to work because of that, they go, well, you broke it, you fix it. So now it's your job to find the solution. And years ago, I was asked to speak at a writers group at Raleigh Studios. I guess they do it, or they used to do it on the weekends, and they would have somebody from the industry come, and then they would read someone's pages of the group that week, and it was a large group. And so I said, can I watch what you do? And then they said, sure. So I watched the Nice House executive I know speak, and then they read this woman's Grey's Anatomy pages. They read one act of her Grey's Anatomy spec, which took place at a ball game and had ghosts in it. Okay. And I thought, this has nothing to do with Grey's Anatomy aside from the same character names. Anyway, so they read this act, and then they say, okay, everybody give her notes, but only tell her what you liked. Don't tell her what you didn't like.
It doesn't work. It doesn't.
And I said, I looked around the room and I said, this is a total waste of time for everyone in this room.
Right.
But I'm sure it happened because you had those people there who said, you're terrible, this is awful, I hated it, it didn't work. And those are the people you need to weed out of your life as fast as possible. Well, we've all met them, we've all had them,
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Again, I think it comes down to asking questions. I mean, when I'm taking notes from people, and not executives, just from friends or, my manager gives me notes. I mean, what he does, which I find really helpful to ask a lot of questions. What are you trying to do with this? You know, what's your theme? How does this scene play into your theme? How does this character? You know, it's like
Right.
that's the proper way, I think, to give notes, right? You start by asking the person what they're trying to do, why they made these choices, and then you can sort of help them make their writing better, as opposed to sort of imposing your idea of what it should be onto it. It's huge, and you can really turn people off, and you can, particularly if they're young writers, it's the opposite. You can really make young writers feel, instead of digging in, they'll start to doubt themselves.
They shut down.
They'll shut down, and that's not the goal either. The goal is how do I help you make your vision better? That should be the goal.
It's funny, when I was younger, I would give my specs to my friends to read and just want to hear how great it was. And now I give it to them and I just want to hear what's broken.
Right.
Like, just tell me what's not working. Because I know, like, maybe that piece works, maybe it doesn't. Really, you know what I mean? But now I'm like, please just tell me what's broken because I really want to fix it.
Right. Yeah.
You're probably on the same way.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and I think it's terrible to just tell someone that their writing sucks. And on the other hand, and when I'm giving notes, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes my mother's friend's daughter's cousin has has written this thing. Will you read it? And for the most part, I really try, because I really feel like nobody helped me when I first started. Absolutely nobody. I was so flying blind, and I try to help people, and I try to read as much as I can when I can. But I do find that every once in a while, most people are really grateful and really appreciate it, but every once in a while you get somebody who says, that's fine, but so-and-so really liked it. Like, I gave it to this executive who was the cousin of a so-and-so, and so-and-so really liked it, and then I'll go, well, it sounds like they're maybe the person you should be talking to, because it sounds like they really get it, and then I leave, and then I'm pissed. It's like, you wasted my time. It's like, you don't have to agree with me, but don't insult me by telling me somebody else knows, told them it was good.
I was in a writer's group one time where there was a point where there was a person in the group that was a little bit of a problem because they would argue with all the notes, right? And so my big thing is, like, when you're this kind of note giving you're talking about, like, it's a favor, right? So
right.
Say thank you. Don't argue with them that they're wrong about their notes. Like, we're spending the time giving notes. And there was one time where, like, the argument, she was arguing with every single thing I said, and I actually stopped giving halfway through my notes. That's all I had, because I'm just like, why am I wasting my time?
Why am I wasting my time? I mean, and
not in my benefit. So.
Right, and I'll try to give really, like, constructive notes, so you can say, I'll say, if you want it to be this kind of a movie, let's talk about that. If you want to be that kind of movie, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you want. I mean, I really try to sit and think about it, again, because I didn't have that guidance when I first started. So I try to give as much as I can in any ways that I can. It's a little insulting to be like, well, I'll go to the person who really likes it, because, they tell me all the things I want to hear.
Well, again, it's like, when you're young, it's like calling your baby fat.
Yeah,
or
I know.
calling your baby ugly. And as we have more time in this, we rate more, we realize, oh, this is spec number 48. It's like, and next year will be 58. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't, like, when you have that many children, they all sort of lose their luster in that, and not in a bad way. You love them all, but you just have to kind of accept that they're all imperfect in some way, and you want to try to help them as best. So yes, I agree. The notes, it's infuriating. And I try not, when people ask you to read stuff, I typically try to create an excuse not to anymore. Because all they want to hear is the good stuff, and they want to help them get an edge. Which, look, we all did at the beginning. So as a young writer, I guess my note to that would be, listen.
Yes.
Don't get defensive. We're not attacking you. We're trying to help you strengthen the balance of your movie.
Right. There's I get nothing. Like taking several hours out of my day, reading this carefully, writing it down, coming in a meeting with you. I mean, I can buy myself the coffee. Like, just listen, because I'm really trying to help you. I want you to get the agent. I want you to sell this project. That's good. But yes, I mean, I have had that, defensive in different ways.
I just had this. I find this funny. My manager knows me so well in a way, like because so I have this like an independent script, and there's these producers that they want to go raise some money, but they're fairly new to producing. They come from another aspect of the business, and they said, "Would you be open to making a few changes in this script?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's hear the notes." And then so they sent my manager the note, or they sent us the notes, I guess they sent my manager first, and they were kind of like they were a little vague, and so he said, I'm going to call them and just try to figure out what they're getting at. And the thing was, he's like, oh, they were afraid to hurt your feelings. And he was like, I told him, like, no, just tell Doug what you want. He can handle it. Like, he'll be fine. Like, tell him what you want and he'll give it to you or tell you why it won't work. But yeah. So it's funny that, like, I think after a certain point, you're like, yeah, just tell me what you want. No. Don't waste my time with, like, buttering me up and all that kind of stuff. So
That said, I have to say, and I agree with you 100%. I am working with a producer now, and every time I talk to her, she like compliments me up the wazoo, and I don't mind it. I'm okay with that. It's actually, and I think because I worked so hard on this project, and it's like I really put my heart and soul into it, and I put so much time into it, and it's like, when she says these very nice things, I'm kind of good. Like, it's all right. I'll take it. She'll tell me the other stuff, and I listen and I care, but and I would listen either way, but it is kind of nice now and then just to.
Yeah, compliments are certainly welcome. I think it's like when they're like,
they don't want to
hoping I'll guess what they want because they don't really want to say it, and it's like, no, I don't want to guess. Just tell me what you think, and I'll deal with it. So yeah.
That doesn't help. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I find at the beginning when they always start that meeting with, so we really like the draft. And you just know what's going on. You just know, like, here it comes. Like, you did a lot of great work. We really appreciate it. And you're like, here it comes. Like, you're just going to, like, wow. It's like, so we hate every character and we don't like the plot.
Right. But other than that, listen, I once had a producer who's a well-known producer to be a little bit mean. And he just called me in, and he was an older guy. And he said, I'm so disappointed in you. And I was like, oh my God. And I think it was a tactic. I really do. But it was so like, of course I wanted to say, oh my God, I want to make you proud again. But, it was such a sort of like, you learn to deal with all of it. You have to deal with all of it. And I think that's the answer. And you have to be ready for anything. You have to be ready for notes that don't make sense. You have to be ready for notes that take you in a different direction. You have to be ready, to hear it's great, but I love the draft, but my God, yes, I know. It's just take a breath. It's probably the best advice.
I will just add, I think we're nearing the end, but one of the things I tried to do was learn better tactics. So I read the book by the FBI hostage negotiator.
Really?
Yes. So I read, because he was like the number one hostage negotiator for the FBI for like years. And he wrote a book about it, how to negotiate in business. And I thought, this is fantastic. And it's really, really fascinating. Yeah. But one of the things he does is he says, when you're having a conversation, repeat back the last two words the person just said to you. Okay. And they'll think that you heard them. And they'll feel heard, and they'll agree with you.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
Interesting.
I didn't think that.
So if you and the producer started to do this to me on the set of the movie I was directing. So then I turned it, because he and I both read the book and we talked about it. And then I turned it around on him, and he didn't realize I was doing it. And then he would come back and he goes, "You son of a bitch!" And then but I just do it as a joke.
Right.
Like, but it does actually work. It actually makes people feel heard, like you're listening. So first of all, I recommend the book. It's a fascinating read. And second of all, and it's great about negotiating too, like getting your price up or getting them to see where you're coming from. But also, it's just a fascinating like insight into human behavior and how you.
Wow.
Hostage negotiation in Hollywood.
I'm all over that, and I want the name of that book.
I definitely encourage reading a book on negotiation if you're a writer. I think it's for the actually more the latter reason you said about like you have to negotiate price and that kind of thing, and we're not trained in that as writers. So good book on negotiation.
At all.
Yeah.
And we actually, part of us thinks, oh my God, I'm so lucky to be able to do what I love for a living. I'll take $1. When really you're worth like $100,000. We all see every writer I bring this therapist who feels the same way.
Right.
You're paying me to do what I love that I would do for free.
Right.
Okay, I don't want to offend you, so I'll do it for 10.
The first thing I sold was funny because I took out this project and we got an offer on it from a network and I was so excited. And my manager said, "Okay, great." And then you have another meeting with this other network, and I'm like, "Oh no, I got one. It's good. Like we're set." And he's like, "No, you continue." And I'm like, "No, I did it." It's it was just very funny that I had to get sort of that through my head.
When I was negotiating my first deal, or not, I wasn't doing it, but when my lawyer was negotiating the very first deal I ever had, there was a point where she said, like, "Okay, we're close. Now I'm going to ask them for the stuff they really don't want to give you. Don't answer your phone for anybody but me." Because she's like, they're going to try to convince you to fire me, right? And so like I did, and like my phone started ringing, and then when I saw it was her on the caller ID, and I answered, and she was like, "Okay, we got everything we wanted. You can start talking to people again." But like she knew I was weak, right, and that I would get paid. So
yeah, well, that's another thing I would suggest. Just in terms of when you're doing this, if you have representatives that are dealing with money, don't talk money. Never talk money. Never talk any of it. You're creative. Your job is to be creative and to deal with that end of it. Never bring it up. If it's brought up, move on to something else because you pay people to do that, and they're the bad guys, and that's what they're supposed to do.
And they know a lot more about it. I mean, probably the realization I've had, and is that, and you're talking about like how we're so excited to even be working, right? But like they use that against us. Right, like not that it's so adversarial, but they've definitely their job is to get us for the cheapest price, and they know that so they know that we don't know what we're worth, right? And that was kind of my lawyer's point was like she knew what I was worth and I didn't know, and so let her do the negotiations, and that's just better for everybody. And then I don't have to be the bad guy in the negotiations. They can hate her and love working with me. So
that's why they're there. They're the buffer. So one thing I learned from my attorney was. There was a point in this article in the contract, the one that I told the broad green, and the producer wanted to put in, and my attorney just went, "No, we're not discussing that," and he just crossed it off, and he said it's not even open for negotiation. And the producer wanted an idea by credit, and he said that doesn't even exist. Doesn't even exist in Writers Guild. The answer is no. And he just redlined it, and I said, "What do you get?" I said, "What if he brings it back up?" He said, "I'm not going to talk about it. It's done." It was like, you have that power.
I mean, that's right, because when you're first starting, I mean, and this is also, I had a friend who was working with a producer on a project and signed something, and he was so excited that this producer wanted to talk to him, and my friend signed something, and boy, did that just screw up the project for like 2 years, because they eventually got sold to a studio, and nobody could make it because this thing was happening, and his reputation was sort of like, this is how he breaks in, right? He sells this project with this cloud over it, so you have to be really careful about that kind of thing.
The power of that is there is a power to no in the note section. Now, saying no eventually is saying like, but you have to weigh the costs of no.
Right.
Of am I being difficult now, or am I defending story? And where's that?
Yeah.
If I give you this is going to cause. Here's the thing I found. When they don't understand that when you throw the penny in the pond, the ripple goes all the way across the lake. So when they say, cut that out here, you say, but that affects this, and this. And you love this, and this.
Right.
So if I take that out, this, and this are now gone. And then they go, oh, I didn't see that. But it's our job as like a story photographer, if you will, to see the landscape.
Yeah.
And they don't see story landscape. We see story landscape. And that's something to keep in mind when you tell them, this is like the notes I get sometimes are, we want you to add to the scene, but we need the script to be shorter.
I am telling you, I've gotten that note. I have gotten that note, and you're just like, and you're just like, and then so the question is, what should I take out? Nothing. Do you want me to move the margins? Is that basically the answer? Because sometimes that is the answer. Like
that's not how math works.
Right.
I literally had the note. We need to make it 10 pages shorter, but don't cut anything. And I was like, that sentence doesn't make logical sense. Like how they're like, well, we don't, because it's funny and we don't want you to cut into the humor. So make it 10 pages shorter, but just don't cut anything. And I was like, I need more, like I need more guidance there.
It's really, I mean, it blows your mind. And it's sort of like, just getting back to something you said, Doug, which I think is really, really important when you're taking notes in a meeting. Don't, and sort of a tangential point, but be careful to not embarrass, like, the boss or the underling or whatever, because like you're saying, David, like you may know and see that if I take this, this is the worst note ever. This will kill my script. This is going to take everything good out of it. And my God, am I going to be able to get you on the phone again later to explain this? But you got to get on the phone later to explain it. You must or send an email. I really thought about it. I understand why you, suggested this. Let me explain what my, now that I've had some time to think about it, let me explain what's happening. Don't do it in the room.
I feel like if you embarrass someone on a note, they will now fight for that note. Right? They may not even care, but now their ego is at stake, and now they're going to make sure that you do that thing. So,
right.
Absolutely.
Right. You have to be a little careful about your facial expressions too. No, you can't. I have a really bad poker face, and everyone's will come in. I'll be like, it's just so obvious that I'm freaking out about how am I going to do this, and don't do that.
When you're developing something for a long time with executives, they sometimes go, "Well, that joke's not funny."
Right.
And I'm like, okay, but it's not funny because we're 12 drafts in and you've read the first draft and you've forgotten that it's funny because you've read it. So I remember when we first sat down, you loved that joke.
Right.
So you lose that freshness of the read and you have to remind them it's not funny to us because we know it. So please keep in mind that we should have somebody else read it and think it's funny. It is funny. You laughed when I laughed when I wrote it. You laughed when you read it. All the readers laughed when you read it. They lose that spark of the story kind of gets dulled over time because they're familiar with it, and you have to remind them that is a normal part of the process.
You know what I do sometimes when that happens is I'll read it out loud. Yeah, I'll or I'll have someone else read it out loud. Like, and let's try it. Let's see if it's still. Maybe you're right, but maybe it's like we were saying. Maybe we read too many. Let's try it again. Just put it in a different medium.
Right.
As opposed to just reading it again and again. Yeah.
And the same with plot twists. They know the plot twist is coming, so they've read it twice. So this isn't surprising anymore.
Right.
Like, funny, it's surprising.
Right. I know. Which is why, you make your first draft good.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you, guys. That was a very enlightening discussion. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
I'm sorry we digress.
Thank you all for watching. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel to see more of these podcasts, click the button in the lower right. We'll see you next week for more schmoozing about writing.